Evelyn Hart had never traveled so far in her entire life. The long train ride across the country felt like stepping out of one world and watching another rise slowly outside the window. She came from a quiet neighborhood in Rhode Island, where people spoke softly, walked gently, and knew everyone by name. Out here, on the train that rattled across endless miles, the world felt bigger, louder, and far more uncertain. She sat with her hands tightly folded on her lap, looking out at land so wide that her eyes almost could not take it all in. She kept thinking about the agreement she had signed, the letters she had exchanged, and the promise she had made to herself. She wasn't running toward adventure. Not really. She was running away from a life that had become too heavy for her small shoulders. Her family's shop had closed, debts had grown, and her uncle had begun speaking about marrying her to a man she did not love. When the advertisement for mail-order brides appeared in a local newspaper, it felt like the only door still open. She hesitated at first, but the idea grew inside her. Maybe she could start fresh somewhere no one knew her. Maybe in that faraway western town, she could breathe again. The letters from Calder Boone were short, but honest. He wrote about owning a cattle ranch, about needing a partner, and about wanting someone who wished for a steady life. Not a perfect one. He never promised magic or luxuries. He promised a place where she would have purpose and a man who would work hard beside her. Evelyn liked that. She appreciated simplicity more than fancy words. Still, as the train moved closer and closer to her destination, her stomach tightened with fear. It was one thing to imagine a new life, it was another to step into it for real. The train finally began to slow as it approached Red Bluff. Dust swirled outside the windows, and the small station came into view. Even from the train, she could see it was nothing like the stations back home. There were no tall buildings, no paved streets, no delicate shops with neat windows. Instead, there were wooden structures, wagons, horses tied to posts, and people dressed for work rather than comfort. Everything looked rough and practical. Evelyn swallowed hard and tried to calm her shaking hands. When the train halted, passengers stood and grabbed their bags. Evelyn took a deep breath, hugged her simple travel bag to her chest, and stepped off the train onto the platform. The air smelled of dust, leather, and animals. But also something crisp and open: freedom, maybe. She looked around, searching for the man she had only seen in one old photograph. In the photo, he stood straight, tall, and serious, with a hat that cast a shadow over his eyes. He had looked strong, but photographs did not prepare her for the real thing. Calder Boone was even larger in person. He stood near the end of the platform, towering above most people around him. Broad shoulders, wide chest, hands that looked like they could lift a gate without effort. His presence made others step out of his way naturally, though he did not seem aware of it. When he spotted Evelyn, he walked toward her with calm, heavy steps. She felt her feet freeze in place, her breath caught in her throat. He stopped in front of her, looking down with eyes that were surprisingly gentle under the brim of his hat. She felt like a small bird in the shadow of a tree. Her voice would not come out, and her fingers clenched the strap of her bag until they hurt. Calder looked at her for a long moment, taking in her small frame, her nervous eyes, her delicate features. He wasn't disappointed, not exactly, but he saw how young and fragile she seemed compared to the wild land she had traveled into. His voice was deep and carried easily over the noise of the platform. He meant to reassure her, to offer comfort in his simple way, but his words came out rougher than he intended. "You're too small for this place," he said quietly. "But don't worry, I'll make it fit for you." Evelyn blinked, her heart jumping. She didn't know what he meant. His tone was steady, but his size and his sudden closeness made her nervous. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. She tried to speak, but only a tiny sound escaped. Calder frowned softly, confused by her fear. He had spoken honestly, maybe too honestly. He meant that she seemed too delicate for the harsh frontier, but he would help her adjust however he could. He didn't mean anything unkind. He didn't realize how heavy his words felt on her already troubled mind. Calder lifted her bag from her hands with one effortless motion. "You must be tired," he said, trying again. more gently this time. Let's get you home. Home. The word felt strange. She had a home once, full of lace curtains and warm tea and tiny hand-painted dishes. Homes here were made of wood, dirt, and survival. She followed him quietly, each step feeling like she was walking into an unknown future. Her shoes sank slightly into the dusty ground. Men walked past, carrying tools and supplies. Women hurried by with baskets and children. Everyone seemed busy, strong, and prepared. She felt small, truly small, in a way she had never felt before. Calder helped her into the wagon waiting near the station. The wooden seat was hard, and the leather reins hanging from the horse's harness looked worn from long use. He sat beside her, and she could feel the warmth of his presence, even without touching him. He wasn't trying to frighten her. It was simply who he was: strong, solid, steady. She tried to breathe slowly, telling herself she had chosen this path. She had asked for a new beginning. Now she had to face it. As the wagon moved through the town, Evelyn studied everything with wide eyes. The buildings were simple but strong. The people looked tough, shaped by the land. She could hear distant cattle, the clink of tools, and the murmur of voices that carried in the open air. The sun felt hotter here, brighter, almost too bright for her pale skin. Calder noticed her squinting and shifted his hat slightly, shading her without saying a word. It was a small gesture, but a kind one. The road soon stretched into open land. The horizon seemed endless. Fences lined parts of the fields, and clusters of cattle grazed in the distance. Birds circled lazily overhead. Evelyn had never seen so much space. It felt beautiful and frightening at the same time. There was nowhere to hide here, no corners, no quiet alleys, no small rooms. Everything was big. Everything demanded strength. Calder finally spoke again, his voice softer this time. I know it's a lot to take in. I remember coming out here when I was your age. It's different. Harder. But it's honest work. You'll find your place. Evelyn nodded, though she was not sure. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap. She wanted to ask him many questions: what the ranch looked like, what her duties might be, whether he truly wanted her there, but her voice still trembled too much to use. Calder glanced at her from the side and seemed to understand. He didn't push her to talk. He simply drove the wagon forward, with steady patience. As they traveled farther, Evelyn saw the outline of a ranch house in the distance, a simple, single-story cabin, with a small porch and a barn nearby. Smoke rose from its chimney. It was not large, not fancy, but it looked cared for. The land around it stretched out wide and open, touched by wind and sun. It was a place built for work, not comfort. When they reached the yard, Calder stopped the wagon and helped her down. His hands were warm and steady as they guided her, but he released her quickly so she wouldn't feel trapped. She stepped onto the ground, trying to steady her legs after the long ride. The ranch felt quiet, peaceful even, but also carried a weight of responsibility she wasn't sure she could bear. Calder set her bag on the porch and opened the door for her. I know it's all new, he said, trying to speak gently, but you're safe here. We'll take things slow. Evelyn stepped inside the cabin. It was small but clean. The wooden floor was swept. The table was strong and simple. A shelf held a few books and tools. A single window let sunlight spill across the room. It wasn't the life she left behind, but it wasn't unkind either. It was just different, wild in a way she was not yet used to. Calder stood behind her, watching carefully, trying to see if she was overwhelmed. Evelyn's heart still raced, but she felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could grow into this new world. Maybe she wasn't too small after all. She turned slightly, her voice finally lifting, though still soft. Thank you, she whispered. Calder nodded, relieved to hear her speak. You're welcome, he said. Then, almost shyly, we'll figure this out together. It was a beginning, shaky, uncertain, but real. And as the sun leaned lower in the sky, and the ranch settled into evening calm, Evelyn took her first quiet breath of a life she hoped she could someday call her own. Life at the Boone Ranch began quietly for Evelyn. But the quiet was not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that made every sound sharper, every movement bigger, every new task a challenge she had never known before. On her first morning, she woke to the soft creak of floorboards and the smell of something warm in the air. Calder was already awake, moving around the kitchen, placing a steaming pot on the table. He worked with steady, practiced motions, as if he had done the same thing every day for years. Evelyn sat up slowly, smoothing her hair with trembling fingers. She still felt like a guest, not someone who lived here. Calder looked over his shoulder and gave her a polite nod. "You can take your time," he said gently. "Breakfast will wait for you." His voice, though deep, carried no impatience. Evelyn appreciated that. She washed her face, adjusted her dress, and joined him at the table. The meal was simple: cornbread, eggs, and coffee, but it tasted comforting after so many days of travel. Calder ate in silence, not out of rudeness, but because he didn't know what to say yet. He had always lived with men who spoke only when necessary. Evelyn, on the other hand, came from a world where conversation filled every meal. The silence felt heavy between them. When they finished, Calder stood and reached for his hat. "I'll show you around the ranch before I start the day's work." Evelyn nodded, her heart fluttering nervously. She followed him outside, into the bright morning air. The land stretched far in all directions, open and wide. The grass waved in the breeze like an endless green sea. In the distance, cattle grazed calmly. The barn stood tall, worn by weather but still strong. Calder pointed out each building, explaining what went where and what each part of the ranch needed. "This place can feel too big at first," Calder said quietly as they walked. "But it won't always feel that way." Evelyn nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it yet. She felt small in the middle of all that land, smaller even than she had felt the day she arrived. The house behind them looked tiny compared to the open fields, and she wondered how anyone could manage so much space. Calder showed her the chicken coop, the well, the fenced garden that needed work, and the shed where tools were stored. Evelyn tried her best to pay attention, but her mind jumped from one worry to another. Could she help enough? Would she disappoint him? What if she slowed him down? When they reached the barn, Calder pushed open the door and the scent of hay drifted into the air. Horses shifted inside, their hooves tapping softly on the wooden floor. Evelyn stepped back instinctively. Animals were not her area of comfort. Calder noticed and paused. "You don't have to go in yet," he said kindly. "We'll take it slow. You don't have to learn everything in one day." His gentle tone surprised her. Given his size and quiet nature, she had expected him to be strict. Instead, he seemed patient. Awkward at times, but patient. Slowly, she stepped closer, letting the horses see her before she stepped inside. One of them, a brown mare with kind eyes, lowered her head toward her. Evelyn reached out carefully, her fingers brushing the soft nose. "She likes you," Calder said, watching her with a look she couldn't read. Animals know when someone has a gentle heart. Evelyn blushed slightly and lowered her hand. She looked down at her shoes, unsure how to respond. Calder didn't push her to speak. He simply closed the barn door and walked her back toward the house. "Today you don't have to do any real chores," he said. "Just get used to the place. Rest if you need to. Explore a little." Evelyn wished she could respond with confidence, but all she managed was a quiet, "Thank you." Calder gave her a small nod and headed out into the fields to begin his own work. He moved with a natural ease, like someone who belonged to the land. Evelyn watched him for a moment, admiring his strength and steady pace. Then she turned back toward the house, feeling alone not because he ignored her, but because she was new to everything around her. Inside the cabin, she tried to occupy herself. She cleaned the small kitchen, though it didn't really need cleaning. She organized a shelf, brushed dust from the table, and arranged the few books neatly. By midday, she ran out of tasks. The silence wrapped around her again. She heard the distant sound of cattle, the wind brushing against the house, and occasionally Calder's voice calling to his horse. But inside, everything felt too still. She stepped outside, hoping to gather some courage with the fresh air. The sun warmed her skin, and the wind lifted strands of her hair. She walked slowly toward the small garden Calder had shown her earlier. The fence was crooked in places, and weeds climbed over the edges. Kneeling down, she touched the soil. It was dry, but not lifeless. If cared for, it could grow something new. She liked the thought of that. Evelyn spent several hours pulling weeds and gently loosening the soil. It wasn't easy. Her hands grew sore, her knees ached, but she felt proud when she stepped back and saw the small patch looking more cared for. She wiped her forehead and smiled softly to herself. When Calder returned to the house later that afternoon, he noticed the change immediately. "You worked in the garden," he said, sounding impressed. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," Evelyn replied quietly. It felt peaceful. Calder nodded, studying the neat rows and cleared ground. "You did a good job." It was a simple compliment, but Evelyn felt it warm her heart. She looked away shyly, brushing dirt from her skirt. Calder noticed her tired hands and frowned slightly. "You should rest," he said. "You worked hard today." Evelyn hesitated. "I didn't do much." "You did enough," he answered firmly, though kindly. "Life out here isn't a race. You don't have to prove anything in one day." For a moment, their eyes met. Evelyn saw sincerity in his gaze. He truly meant what he said. Calder, too, felt something shift. He had expected a woman who would struggle with the land, who might complain or shrink away. Instead, she tried her best, even though she was afraid. He respected that more than he knew how to say. As days passed, Evelyn learned more about the ranch. Though slowly, she helped collect eggs, swept the barn aisle, folded laundry, and carried small buckets of water to the garden. Calder often adjusted tasks for her, making them easier. He lowered shelves, brought lighter tools, and shortened the saddle stirrups so she could learn to sit on a horse without fear. She noticed every small thing he did, even when he acted like it was nothing. But even with his efforts, misunderstandings still grew between them. Calder spoke in short, direct sentences that sounded stern, even when he didn't mean them to. Sometimes he gave instructions that felt too sudden or too blunt. Evelyn, unused to such straightforwardness, often misread his tone as disappointment. She would lower her head, thinking she had failed, even when he wasn't upset at all. One morning, when she dropped a bucket of water by accident, it splashed onto the porch. Calder rushed over to help, but his voice came out louder than he intended. "Careful," Evelyn flinched, stepping back as if she'd done something terrible. Her eyes lowered. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Calder paused, confused. "It's not your fault. I was just warning you." But the moment had already shaken her confidence. For the rest of the day, she moved too cautiously, and Calder wondered quietly where he had gone wrong. Their differences didn't create anger, they created distance. Calder wanted to protect her. Evelyn wanted to please him. But neither understood the other well enough yet, and their attempts to show care often turned into silence or worry. Still, despite the confusion, a slow bond began to form. Calder noticed how Evelyn's steps became steadier, how she lingered outside a little longer each day, and how she tried tasks again even when she feared she had failed. Evelyn noticed that Calder always looked back to check if she was managing, that he spoke more gently each day, and that he treated her presence with quiet respect. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in soft colors, Evelyn stood by the porch railing, watching the horizon. Calder stepped beside her, leaning lightly against the wooden post. Neither spoke for a while, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence this time. It felt shared, like a moment they both understood. "You're learning fast," Calder said finally, softly. Evelyn smiled, small but genuine. "I'm trying." "That's enough," he replied. "More than enough." She looked up at him, and for the first time, she didn't feel intimidated by his size or his quiet nature. She felt something steady beside her, something she might someday trust fully. The ranch was still big. The work was still hard. Their misunderstandings were still there. But something gentle was beginning to grow between them, like a small seed in newly turned soil, and neither of them knew it yet. But that fragile beginning would soon be tested in ways they never expected. The weather had been changing little by little in the days leading up to the trouble. Clouds gathered more often. The wind picked up dust from the fields, and the air felt heavier than usual. Evelyn could sense something coming, even though she couldn't explain how. The sky looked wider, more restless. The land, normally peaceful, seemed to hold its breath. Calder noticed it too. He watched the horizon with a sharp, practiced gaze every morning. The cattle grew uneasy, moving in restless groups, and the horses neighed at sounds Evelyn couldn't even hear. The ranch dogs stayed closer to the porch, ears perked. Nature had its own warnings, and even Evelyn, new to frontier life, could feel them. One afternoon, when the wind blew stronger than usual and the sky darkened earlier than expected, Calder stood at the barn doorway, tightening the saddle on his horse. Evelyn approached slowly, her apron fluttering in the wind. "You're going out?" she asked, her voice soft but laced with worry. Calder looked at her and nodded. "Some of the fence lines got weak from the last storm. If another one hits, the cattle could scatter. I need to check them now." Evelyn held her hands together. "Will it be dangerous?" He shook his head gently. "Not dangerous. Just long work." The wind tugged at Evelyn's hair as she watched him prepare. She wanted to ask him not to go, to wait for the storm to pass. But she knew ranch life didn't allow for comfort over duty. Calder had responsibilities that couldn't wait. Still, something inside her twisted with unease. Calder paused before climbing onto his horse. He looked at her with a softer expression than he usually showed. "Stay in the house if the wind gets worse. Close the shutters. I'll be back before dark if I can." Evelyn nodded, though her chest felt tight. Calder gave her a small, reassuring smile, barely there, but real, before riding off into the open land. His figure grew smaller as he disappeared into the shifting curtain of dust. For a while, Evelyn busied herself inside the cabin. She folded laundry, stirred a pot of soup, and checked the windows. But the wind grew louder, whistling around the corners of the house and rattling the shutters. The sky grew darker, clouds rolling across it like thick smoke. The air felt thick and tense, as if the land itself was waiting. When the first rumble of thunder echoed, Evelyn's hands froze on the table. She turned toward the window, her heart thumping hard. Lightning flashed in the distance, turning the fields white for a blink of a moment. She stepped back without meaning to, her breath catching. She remembered Calder's words, "Stay inside, close the shutters." She hurried to each window, fastening them tightly. The house creaked under the sudden push of the wind. Outside, leaves and dust whipped through the air, spinning in the rising storm. The first drops of rain began to fall, light at first, then rapidly turning into heavy, pounding sheets. Evelyn stood in the center of the room, arms wrapped around herself. She had never seen a storm like this. Back home, storms were loud but distant. Here, it felt like the sky was right above her, shaking the world with sound and force. Minutes passed, then longer. She checked the door, making sure it was locked. The rain poured so hard, she couldn't even see the yard through the window. Thunder cracked again and again, each time making her jump. But even through her fear, one thought kept repeating in her mind. Where was Calder now? She imagined him out there in the open land, struggling against the wind, his horse fighting the rising currents. She tried to push the thought away, but it stayed with her, twisting her stomach with worry. Suddenly, a noise outside made her freeze. It wasn't thunder this time. It was something scraping, something moving. Evelyn stepped toward the window, but the storm made it impossible to see clearly. The rain soaked the ground so quickly that water began spreading across the yard, collecting in puddles that grew by the minute. The sound came again, this time louder. Evelyn gathered her courage and cracked the door open just enough to peek out. A gust of wind almost ripped it from her hands. She held it tightly and squinted into the storm. Then she saw it. The small chicken coop, which had always stood firm against the barn wall, had been torn loose by the wind. It lay on its side, its roof partially broken, and frightened chickens scattered in the rushing floodwater. Evelyn gasped. She couldn't leave them like that. They would drown or freeze in the cold rain. For a moment, fear held her still. She thought of staying inside, just like Calder told her. But as she watched the helpless animals flap and cry in the storm, something inside her shifted. She couldn't ignore them, not when they depended on her. Without giving herself more time to think, she grabbed Calder's old coat from the hook, pulled it around her shoulders, and stepped outside. The rain hit her face like needles. The wind nearly knocked her off balance. But she pressed forward. One step at a time. Water soaked her dress immediately, weighing it down. The mud pulled at her shoes. Her hair stuck to her cheeks, and the storm roared in her ears. But she kept going, her eyes fixed on the struggling chickens. She reached the coop, her breath coming in short gasps. The animals flapped wildly, too scared to move. Evelyn crouched and gently lifted them one by one, holding them close as she carried them toward the porch. She made several trips, each harder than the last, but she did not stop until every chicken was safe under the shelter of the house. By the time she finished, she was drenched, shivering, and exhausted. She collapsed onto the porch for a moment, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The storm raged on, but she felt a strange mix of fear and pride. Fear because the world around her was shaking with thunder, and pride because she had done something she never thought she could. She hurried back inside, breathing hard. The house felt small but warm compared to the raging storm outside. She lit a lamp, trembling as she placed it on the table. The chickens clucked nervously outside but were safe under the covered porch. She sank into a chair, hugging her arms around herself, listening to the thunder roll and the wind howl. And still, Calder had not returned. As the minutes stretched into hours, Evelyn's fear grew. The storm did not slow. The rain kept falling, filling the yard with more and more water. She paced the room, her steps quick and uneven. Every sound made her jump. Every flash of lightning made her heart skip. She imagined Calder soaked, struggling to guide his horse through the mud. She imagined him stuck behind fallen branches, or trying to calm frightened cattle. She had no way of knowing where he was, or how to help him. Still, she waited. Finally, after what felt like forever, she heard hoofbeats through the storm. At first she thought she imagined it, but then she heard them again, slow, heavy, uneven. She rushed to the window and pushed it open just a little. Through the rain, she saw Calder riding toward the house, his hat gone, his coat soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. His horse moved grudgingly, tired and frightened, but Calder guided it with calm determination. Evelyn flung the door open and ran out into the rain without thinking. Calder slid off the horse the moment he reached the porch, his legs shaking with exhaustion. Evelyn reached out and grabbed his arm to steady him. "You're safe," she breathed, relief pouring through her. Calder looked at her, surprised to see her outside in the storm, soaked from head to toe. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, breathlessly. "It's too strong." Evelyn shook her head, rain dripping down her cheeks. "I was worried," she said softly. I thought something happened." Calder stared at her for a moment, his expression full of something warm and unspoken. Then, he glanced toward the porch and saw the rescued chickens huddled there. "You did that?" he asked, astonished. Evelyn nodded shyly. "They were in danger. I couldn't leave them." Calder's eyes softened. He reached up slowly, almost hesitantly, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, more gentle than she had ever seen from him. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. "I didn't expect." He paused, searching for the right words. "I didn't expect you to protect the ranch like that." Evelyn felt her cheeks warm despite the cold rain. She lowered her gaze. "I'm trying," she whispered. I want to help. I want to belong here. Calder took a slow breath, the storm still roaring around them. But inside his eyes, there was calm. You do belong here, he said softly. More than you know. Lightning flashed behind them, illuminating the moment briefly, like a photograph. Then, Calder guided her inside, closing the door behind them. They stood in the warm glow of the lamp, dripping and tired, but safe. The storm still raged outside. But inside the cabin, something had changed, something fragile and important. For the first time, they weren't just two strangers sharing a home. They were partners, facing the same storm together. And neither of them would forget what happened that night. The winter sun rose slowly over the wide plains, casting a soft golden light across the ranch. Helena stood on the porch, wrapped in a thick shawl, as she watched the sky shift from pale blue to warm amber. The air was cold enough to make her breath visible, yet something inside her felt warm and steady. Life had changed so much in such a short time, but she finally felt she belonged somewhere. She had a home, a purpose, and a future that did not frighten her anymore. Behind her, the wooden door creaked open. Rowan stepped out, brushing hay dust from his shirt. His dark hair was still damp from his morning wash, and the faint smell of soap and fresh earth clung to him. Helena turned at the sound of his boots on the porch and greeted him with a soft smile. "You're awake early," he said, leaning his shoulder against one of the porch beams. "I wanted to see the sunrise," she replied. "It makes the land look peaceful, like everything is starting fresh." Rowan looked out toward the open fields, the cattle grazing in the far distance. "It does," he agreed. "It reminds me that every day is a chance to do things better." They stood quietly for a moment. The wind rustled the grass, whispering across the land like a soft song. Helena felt calm in a way she had never felt in the city. Out here, the world felt slower, quieter, and kinder. After a moment, Rowan took a small step closer. "I've been thinking," he said carefully. "After everything we've walked through these past months, we've built something strong together." Helena turned her head slightly. "Yes," she said. "We really have." Rowan glanced at her hands, gently folded in front of her shawl. "I want us to keep building it. Not out of duty, or because some papers said we should, but because it's what we both want." Helena felt her chest warm. For so long she had feared being a burden. She had worried she might never truly earn her place in his life. Yet his words were honest and steady. Just like him. "I want that too," she answered softly. His smile was small but full of meaning. "Good. Then let's make today peaceful. We've earned a little calm." Helena nodded, and together they stepped down from the porch to start the day. The ranch had changed since Helena first arrived. The barns were better organized, the kitchen well stocked, and the animals healthier than before. Helena had brought a careful hand to each corner of the home, while Rowan had taken on new work with a determination that impressed even the ranchers in town. As they walked toward the barn, Helena noticed the chickens wandering around the yard. "You forgot to latch the coop again," she teased gently. Rowan sighed dramatically. "They like their freedom a little too much." "That's because they follow your example," she laughed. "Strong-willed and impossible to tame." He gave her a playful glance. "Careful." She shook her head but smiled all the same. Inside the barn, the scent of clean hay and warm animals surrounded them. Helena moved to check the feed bins while Rowan inspected the tack. They had found an easy rhythm together. Even when they were quiet, the silence between them felt natural rather than heavy. At one point, Rowan looked over at her and paused. "Helena, can I ask something?" She straightened from the feed bin. "Of course. Are you happy here?" he asked. "Truly happy?" He asked it as if the answer mattered more than anything else. And it did. Helena stepped closer, brushing dusty straw from her skirt. "I am happy," she said. "Not because everything is perfect, but because I'm not alone anymore. I'm doing real work. I'm part of something. And I'm with someone who treats me kindly." Rowan's expression softened. "You're more than part of something. You're the heart of this place." She looked down shyly, but her smile grew. Later that day, Rowan hitched up the wagon for a trip into town. Supplies needed picking up, and the mail was due to arrive. Helena joined him, settling beside him on the wooden seat. The road was long and bumpy, but she didn't mind. The open sky above them made everything feel wide and full of possibility. When they reached town, Helena noticed how people greeted her differently than before. Once, they had looked at her with curiosity, unsure of who she was or where she had come from. Now, they nodded warmly and spoke to her like she belonged. She had earned her place through honesty and hard work. Inside the general store, she walked the aisles slowly, looking for tools and small comforts they might need. Rowan, who was known for buying only the bare essentials, paused when she held up a small knitted blanket. "It would look nice on the rocking chair," she said. He nodded without hesitation. "Then let's get it." She blinked in surprise. "You didn't even check the price." He shrugged. "Some things matter more." Helena felt a tiny flutter of warmth. The blanket was simple, but it meant something. He was thinking of home, their shared home, and the life they were building inside it. As they walked back toward the wagon, an older woman from town approached them. "Rowan Reed," she said with a knowing smile. "You've changed since this one arrived." She nodded toward Helena. "A good woman can shift a man's whole world." Rowan chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. "Maybe so." Helena's cheeks warmed, but she smiled politely. "We just help each other," she said. "And that," the woman replied, "is the finest foundation anyone can have." When they returned to the ranch, afternoon light painted the land in soft gold. They unloaded the supplies together, laughing when a small sack of flour burst open at Rowan's feet, coating his boots in white dust. "That wasn't my fault," he insisted. "It burst the moment you touched it," Helena pointed out. "Then it was a poorly made sack," he said stubbornly. She tried to hide her smile but failed. After storing everything away, Helena carried the knitted blanket into the house. She spread it carefully over the rocking chair near the window, where the evening sun often poured in. Rowan stepped in behind her, watching the quiet scene. "I like it," he said. Helena ran her fingers along the soft fabric. "It makes the room feel warmer." "Like you do," he answered. She looked up at him, and for a moment they simply stood there, sharing a peaceful silence. Then Rowan cleared his throat. "Helena, there's something else I've been meaning to ask." Her heart fluttered again. "What is it?" He stepped closer, his voice gentle but steady. "When you came here, everything started as an agreement, a practical arrangement. But somewhere along the way, it changed for me." Helena swallowed softly. "It changed for me too." Rowan exhaled slowly, as if relieved. "I want you to stay with me, not because you must, but because it's where you want to be." Her eyes warmed. "Rowan," she said softly, "I don't want to be anywhere else." The words settled between them like sunlight, warm and full of promise. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, carved wooden token. "I've been working on this," he said. "It isn't much, but it's a symbol of, well, everything we're building." She looked down at the token, a small wooden shape of a little house, smooth and carefully carved. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's ours," he answered quietly. Helena held it carefully, as if it were fragile treasure. "Thank you," she whispered. That evening, they sat on the porch as the sky turned shades of violet and rose. Crickets began to chirp, and the cool wind carried the scent of warm earth. Helena leaned her shoulder lightly against Rowan's arm, a simple gesture filled with comfort and trust. Rowan let out a long, satisfied breath. "You know," he said, "when I first agreed to the mail order arrangement, I thought it would be simple, practical, nothing more. And now?" Helena asked gently. He turned his head slightly toward her. "Now I understand that the best things in life aren't simple at all. They're slow and steady, and built day by day, just like this." Helena's smile was soft. "Like us," she said. "Exactly like us." They sat there quietly, watching the stars blink awake in the darkening sky. The world felt wide, but not overwhelming. The future felt unknown, but not frightening. Helena realized she had grown stronger. Not because she changed who she was, but because she had found a place where she could be herself fully. Rowan had not rescued her or shaped her, he had simply walked beside her, giving her room to grow. And in doing so, he had changed too. Their life would not always be easy. Hard seasons would come, storms would hit, and work would sometimes feel endless. But they would face it all together steadily, patiently, hand in hand. As the first bright star shone above them, Helena whispered a quiet truth she had only recently learned. Sometimes the place you're meant to be is the one you never expected. Rowan heard her, and gently reached for her hand. Then we'll keep building, he said softly, day by day. And under the quiet evening sky, with the land stretching out peacefully around them, their story moved forward, strong, hopeful, and full of the gentle promise of a life shared.